The VFW membership webinar for July. I'm Deborah Anderson, the Director of Human Resources for the Veterans of Foreign Wars National Headquarters. My topic today is generational challenges. Before I talk about that, I want to give a little bit of background on the VFW. Many of you already know the history of the VFW. It was started in 1899 when groups began forming around the country following the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War. And these groups formed locally with soldiers that were returning from combat in various locations. Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Ohio had groups that were forming, and these were small, but they recognized that there was a need following those conflicts to take care of veterans, to advocate on their behalf, and to look after their welfare, and to maybe advocate in terms of governments doing more things to take care of people. These groups formed around the country and began to realize that as a national organization, they would be much stronger than as individual local organizations. So in 1913, they got together, had a conference, started talking about what they could become, and in 1914, the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States was officially born as these groups came together. And the reason I bring this up is because some of those early discussions talked about inclusion. One of the very powerful veteran groups at the time was the Grand Army of the Republic, which was veterans of the American Civil War. And that's all they ever wanted to be. And you don't even hear about the Grand Army of the Republic anymore because when that conflict was over and those veterans died off, that organization disappeared. And so as these veterans were coming together, they said, we want to be not just Spanish-American War, Philippine-American War, but we recognize that in the future, there'll be other wars, there'll be other veterans, there'll be other people that need advocacy and need the things that we're going to provide, so we want to be inclusive. And that was a really important ideal that they wanted because, as they said, when old fighting men of one war faded away, new warriors would arise to fill the ranks. And so World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Veterans of Foreign Wars continues to grow because we recognize that it's not just one war and one time, but it is soldiers and sailors and airmen into the future as they become veterans and need the services of this type of organization. So it's been a really good philosophy for us, and it's been really important in our growth and development. But when you look at our membership numbers, this chart shows 1950 to the present, you see that we had that period of growth, and we peaked in about 1992 with 2.1 million members. So a lot of veterans involved, growing, the organization is growing, but we're now on a decline. And there's a couple reasons for that. And one is we don't send 1 million people to war anymore. The nature of warfare has changed. The military is smaller than it used to be. And our current membership then is aging, and so we're losing some of those members as well. So it's important as we look to the future that we find a way to attract more members, and we particularly attract those younger members to the organization because they're our future. One of our members, if I may quote VFW member and Vietnam veteran Jerry Carr, said, "It's not about my war, it's not about World War II, it's not about your war, it's about the kids in third grade whose war hasn't even happened yet." So we want to be here for today's veterans and tomorrow's veterans and future veterans, and to do that, we've got to adapt like we have in the past. We've got to be inclusive, and we've got to find ways to really get people in the organization who have a common need and a common vision as we do. And so in order to do that, today's member needs to understand, and today's recruiter needs to understand something about generational differences. How are our World War II veterans different than our Vietnam veterans, different than Desert Storm and Iraq, Afghanistan? And what are some of those traits that you then can identify and help in order to be more successful in what you want to do? So that's my topic today, is generational differences. And what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the 4 generations that we have in the workforce and in the VFW today, and then give you some success stories in terms of what some posts are doing. And I'll leave you with some information on a video that I would highly recommend you watch to kind of complement this in terms of understanding millennials and where they're coming from. So A lot of my information comes from these two books, When Generations Collide by Lynn Lancaster and David Stillman, and also Sticking Points by Hayden Shaw. But you see a lot of articles in the news now about the generations, but there may be some confusion in terms of what does it all mean, and that's what I want to run through now. Traditionalist. This is our oldest generation currently alive. Sometimes they're called the silent generation or the greatest generation, and these people were born 1900 to 1945 and are currently age 69 and older. So these are your World War II veterans, and we have many of them in our post, but some of them are becoming less active. But let's look at what was going on in the world as these folks were coming of age. A lot of big events: World War I, the Great Depression, the New Deal, World War II, the GI Bill, the rise of big corporations, and the Korean War. These folks saw important things done through big institutions. They generally had one job for their entire, or they worked for one company for their entire careers, and they recognized the importance, because of their military background, of hierarchy and command and control and rules and regulations and doing things a certain way. They had very slow technology, if you can even call it technology. There were no computers. There wasn't even television. So you have face-to-face communication. You write letters and send it in the mail. You get your news through the radio and the newspaper. Slower communication, deliberate, one-on-one, face-to-face, which you'll see contrasted with younger generations. Very patriotic, hardworking, and as I mentioned, they partner with large institutions because that's how you get things done. The Army has a way of doing things, the military, GM, TWA, these big companies accomplish things, and you understand that you play by their rules when you're part of that and get things done in that manner. Leadership style, therefore, is more of command and control. And single word description, if you were kind of to sum up what's a traditionalist, they're very loyal. They're loyal to their country, to their organizations, to their friends, to their companies. That trait is really important in this generation. So following the traditionalists, we have the baby boomers. These are people born between 1946 and 1964, and they're currently age 50 to 68. These are Vietnam veterans, some Desert Storm veterans. We have a lot of baby boomers in the organization. Their influences were a little different. Population was growing. This was a huge generation, about 80 million people. Economic expansion during part of this period. Move to the suburbs, civil rights, the women's movement, Vietnam, Woodstock, Watergate, space exploration. A lot of things going on, a lot of growth, a lot of opportunities. Technology changed. One of the things that really had an influence on them was suddenly there was television and things could happen right there in your home. You could see what was going on in the world. And before, you just heard about things or read about things, and now you saw it visually, and that had a big impact in terms of helping people to see the world and understand world events. It's an optimistic group. They tend to be ambitious and competitive because there's so many of them, focused on individual accomplishments, and they're hardworking, motivated by recognition and advancement. Whereas the traditionalists, you do a good job, you just know you've done a good job. But baby boomers want some of that recognition. They want to be advancing in the organization. They tend to be more of a team players, more consensual or collegiate, but also there's still some of that command and control hierarchy style as well in this group. And a single word that wraps up the baby boomers is optimistic. Optimistic about what they can accomplish and about the future. So those are the baby boomers. Now, the two groups that come after them you may have heard of and had some confusion on, so let's run through what a Generation X is. This is a smaller generation. It follows the baby boomers born 1965 to 1980, and they're currently aged 34 to 49. This group very often had working parents, and so they were more latchkey kids in terms of coming home, being on their own, having to kind of take care of themselves for a while. And there was also a lot going on in the world in terms of the Iranian hostage crisis, AIDS epidemic, Challenger explosion, Berlin Wall coming down, the Cold War ending, Persian Gulf War, and some economic expansion in the 90s. Technology just boomed at this point. Not only did we have television, we now had personal computers. The internet was coming around, cable TV, direct TV, cell phones, smartphones, Palm Pilots. Things were really starting to happen in terms of technology, and they learned how to use these things and are very comfortable with them. As a result of their upbringing, they tend to be resourceful and self-reliant, love using technology, and want feedback even more than the baby boomers. They want to know how they're doing, good and bad. Don't just expect that I'm going to do a good job. I need mentoring and feedback, and work-life balance and flexibility. They tend, of all the generations, to be the most challenging in terms of asking, why do we do it this way? Let's find a better way. Let's change the status quo. And that can be good, but it can also be kind of difficult to work with sometimes. You just need to recognize that they're going to challenge you, and a lot of times they may have some really good ideas. Single word description is skepticism. Because a lot was happening and they were able to see the world through the internet and through television, they saw a lot of big institutions called into question. So things were not quite as rosy and dependable and loyal. It was things being torn down and people being questioned and crimes being uncovered, and therefore they're kind of skeptical and not as trusting as some of the other generations. So following the Generation X is the millennials. They're also known as the Generation Y or the Echo Boomers. They tend to be children of baby boomers and then some of the Gen Xers as well. They were born 1981 to 2000, currently aged 14 to 33. A lot of our Iraq-Afghanistan veterans are millennials, though some of them also are Generation X. They had boomer parents. They saw things such as the Oklahoma City bombing, Columbine high school shootings, the September 11 attack, and for some of them, they were very young when the World Trade Center was attacked. They saw the Dow Jones market hit records, and then that was followed by a recession. So some hard times in addition to some expansion at that time too. Because of the things going on, they tended to be more supervised as kids. So these are the kids that were scheduled day to night, had lots of activities, a lot of parental supervision, kind of the helicopter parents. And they also had a lot of access to technology. They were using tablets and computers as infants. They would play on cell phones and computers and are very, what we call digital natives in terms of really understanding how those things work and how useful they can be in terms of just in general for lots of things. They're tech savvy, they're optimistic, they value experiences very often over material things, and much like the Gen Xers would like constant feedback and tend to be less formal, more casual in terms of how they approach things. Their leadership style is very entrepreneurial and collaborative. Let's work together. Let's be a team. We don't need a hierarchy. We can all figure this out together. And a single word description for them would be realistic. They understand the world. They understand what they can do, but they're optimistic about being able to have an impact. Okay, now that's kind of the basics of the 4 generations. Now here's a TED Talk that I highly recommend. TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, Design, and there's talks usually on YouTube of people giving 15 to 20 minute lectures or talks about various topics. And Scott Hess is a consultant, talks about Generation X and millennials. And you can just Google this, just put in his name and millennials, and you'll find his TED Talk. It's about 21 minutes. And it'll kind of give you another perspective on what this generation is all about. One of the things he talks about is he quotes a New York Times article about, it's called, "What Is It About 20-Something?" And he talks about the article talks about 5 milestones that most people achieve sometime in their lifetime, which are completing school, leaving home, becoming financially independent, marrying and having a child. And how previously people would kind of all do this when they became adults around the age 20 and have accomplished these things by the age 30. And we see this timeline totally being changed now by the younger generations. And in fact, in 1916, 77% of women and 65% of men had achieved these 5 milestones by the age of 30. And it's not like we still don't do these things, but that younger people tend to take longer to do it. And the new statistics are in 2010, 13% of women and 10% of men have achieved these 5 milestones. So you'll just recognize that what he calls emerging adulthood is that time between adolescence and adulthood where you're kind of finding yourself and deciding what you want to do. And there's really no hurry. There's no hurry to do these things, and let's take our time and make the right decision. And so a lot of people between 20 and 30 are still kind of working through these things. Okay, in Hayden Shaw's book, Sticking Points, he talks about, okay, now that you've recognized these generational differences, what can you do about it? And what his focus is on first recognizing that it's there, that maybe you're thinking about something differently than someone else in your group, and that maybe it's a generational issue. And then appreciate it in terms of asking, why is your preference this way and my preference that way, and discussing how could we do this to accommodate everybody. And that's what the flexing is all about. So let's be flexible. Let's not feel like we have to follow this tradition just because we've always done it this way. So let's approach it in a flexible way. Let's leverage by taking advantage of people's strengths. So maybe your younger folks can help you set up the Facebook page, and your older folks can take the minutes for the meeting or whatever in terms of using people's strengths, and then look to resolve those differences in a positive way where everybody feels like they've been listened to. So kind of briefly, his 5 steps, but let's kind of look about how then the VFW posts have recognized the differences and tried to then accommodate all 4 generations. So the first thing, and you'll find this in the VFW magazine, they've run a series of articles about younger posts. And so a lot of this came from there. And then also I called some of the people that were interviewed for the articles and talked with them one-on-one about what things they were doing. And these were kind of the 5 themes that I uncovered out of those discussions. First, we need to offer a welcoming environment for all veterans. And you think, well, that's so obvious. Of course, we need to welcome people. But unfortunately, there are veterans who will walk into a VFW post and nobody will talk to them. They're at the bar, they're having they're wherever at their meeting having their own conversations, and they don't think to get up and include this person walking in. And it's really critical that when somebody does walk into a post, that a member gets up and greets them and says, how are you? You know, how can I help you? Are you a veteran? And not just think that women walking in belong in the ladies' auxiliary. So whether it's, a man or a woman, to greet them and welcome them. If they don't, then you've lost them, and we may never get them back. So I want to quote from an article that was in the Springfield, Missouri paper, and this was a columnist and a veteran. His name was Jess Rollins, and I just loved his article. He says, my buddy and I, both in our early 30s, were greeted warmly when we walked into Springfield's only remaining VFW hall. 2 old-timers were standing behind the near-empty bar. We were thinking about joining the 3404, I announced to the 2 men, using the post number of the building that sits at the intersection of National and Atlantic. For just a moment, the men looked at us like lobsters were crawling out of our ears. It just doesn't happen often that 2 relatively young men stroll in on a Saturday night, bingo night, and ask to join. Mr. Rollins goes on to describe a positive encounter, some good conversation, and he ends the article encouraging younger members to give VFW a try. So now here he's published it all over Springfield saying, go check out the VFW posts. They're really nice people. Now, unfortunately, I've also read blogs that say I walked into the VFW and nobody talked to me, or they were smoking and they were, it just wasn't a nice environment. So the first thing we have to do is make the post someplace that people want to come to. The second thing that I'm hearing from the younger members is they want to be action-oriented. It's more about doing things in the community, having events, doing service, than just having their meetings that they've always had. Some ideas from some of the posts. Post 1 in Denver does yoga classes. They do some financial planning classes. They do job fairs. Post 852 in Lawrence has a discussion group. So they have their meetings, but then they have this group that meets. They call it VFW at Ease, and they just talk about the issues that younger veterans are facing. Post 5806 in Brooklyn, New York has an annual carnival where they bring the public in and they raise money for their junior girls, which is really active. And Post 1115 in Hillsville, Virginia has what they call the Young Guns Committee to plan brainstorming and activities for their post. And my post in Parkville is doing some amazing things in terms of doing events at senior centers where there's veterans, doing social activities, just looking for ways to bring people in. And it's really all within the last year that I'm seeing it at my post, but it's just looking for things that are different than what we've always done. There are posts that do athletic events, 5Ks. They do safety awareness. They get involved in other community activities, arts fairs in some cases. So it's kind of a matter of getting the people together in your post or in the post you're working with and finding out what would interest them and what they think would bring their friends in. The third theme is to partner with other organizations. We're really not in competition with Red, White, and Blue and Team Rubicon and Wounded Warrior Project. They're not the enemy. They are organizations that are here to serve other veterans, and we can very often do events with them, and therefore, our members can see them and their members can see us, and we can work together in order to take care of veterans. The fourth theme is to use technology as a communications and outreach tool. Facebook is easy to use, and it's a way to communicate with people. Twitter, to some extent, other websites, because that's how people find you now, is not necessarily walking into your post, though some do that, but they also find you through social media and through the internet, and you want to make sure your Facebook page or your website is up to date, and if you do Facebook, that you keep things posted on there as well. And my final theme is to be open to change. A lot of the things that we do in the VFW were established in the 1920s and 30s. And it's time to reevaluate those things in terms of our rituals and our meeting agenda and allow some flexibility in those things. Some of the posts have modified the meeting agenda and rituals to better suit their needs. One post has changed the titles of their officers when they're talking to the public. Rather than saying our commander, they'll say this is our CEO, and they have the chief financial officer, who's probably their quartermaster, and they have like a web developer and a public affairs officer, because they recognize who do we need in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish, and they create these positions and they assign people to them. Some posts are updating the look of their buildings because they recognize that a nicer looking post is going to be more attractive to people. And as I mentioned, they're looking at the kinds of activities that they're involved in. So there's a lot that we can learn from our younger members, and the younger members can learn from the older members. The important thing is to sit down and talk about it and figure out your own vision for the future in terms of bringing in members and making the posts and the departments relevant and exciting for people to join. In conclusion, the VFW really does have a bright future. These are our future members, and we need to reach out to them because we really all want the same thing. We want to make sure that veterans have a place to go, that they belong, that they are taken care of, and that they get the benefits that they deserve. So that concludes my presentation. Certainly, if you'd like more information, you can contact the membership department, and I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you. Thank you.